Guys, we're going to go ahead and start. I know I do have one gentleman on the way, and hopefully he'll be here shortly. Again, I want to thank everyone for their patience today. Sometimes the best laid plans do not work out, especially when we're in session. Um, I want to start off by sort of reviewing where we are. This committee has met one time. We met back on September the 27th, and I apologize for the delay in committee hearings, but obviously there's been a few things going on around the state and around the nation lately called elections. So a lot of time and resources, elected officials, folks out in the community have been spent with the election process. So this is really one of the first times we've had to come back after the election as we start to there he is. Yeah, that's all right. It's been one of the first times we've been able to come back after the election and again, I think refocus on this issue. To review, this legislation was based on House Resolution 1194, which is a study committee to look into the issue of retroactive ER billing. We met. Well, before we do that, I want to make sure we understand this committee is supposed to report. I believe it's on the December the 1st. I'm going to ask write a letter and request that the time be extended because of the election cycle, so that we could have possibly 2 more meetings before we write up a report to report back to the General Assembly. But again, we met. I think it was a very interesting meeting. We had some great testimony. We had heard from the Medical Association of Georgia, and we had heard from several of the ER physicians who came in and actually gave examples. Examples of what they saw were denials of emergency room visits. And again, the heart of the issue is, we have folks going into the emergency room and believing that they're in an emergency situation, and then retroactively, in this case, Blue Cross and Blue Shield or Anthem is denying the claim. Some of those examples, and I'll just to bring this back up, we had examples of people in accidents being taken to the emergency room via ambulance. We had people with severe cuts, lacerations. We had people dealing with issues of blood clots. We had one of the final examples that I thought was very telling was a domestic abuse case in which the police took the lady to the emergency room where she was treated with a fracture, and then the emergency room doctors wrote up the report for the police report, and Blue Cross and Blue Shield again said that that was not an emergency, it was not medically necessary. From that hearing, the first call I got was that week from a gentleman that we're going to hear from in a little bit. And then we started reaching out to some of the folks, and we've got some folks who've agreed to come in and testify today, along with some of the hospitals. And I think it's very interesting, very telling as we start to look at this issue, we start to really understand the unscrupulous acts, the consequences to health, the burden of financially that is being put on people who believe that they are insured. And also, I want to remind people, healthcare gets, the actual act of healthcare happens when an individual or hospital, you don't go to an insurance company to get health care. You go to a doctor, a pharmacist, you go to a hospital, That's where you get health care. And from what we're seeing here, this is not only about the patient who is being burdened and saddled with bills, but it's also beginning to put a pattern together that we're beginning to see where the providers are providing these services, yet they're not getting paid. And we're sitting here wrestling in this state and across this country with narrowing networks, doctor shortages, and somehow I think the two could be related, or probably are related. But with that, I want to start the testimony today. I want to start with a young lady that came in. Kara, would you come up? Again, thank you to the folks that have spent their time and their afternoon here at the Capitol waiting on this. Kara, would you just your name and tell us a little bit about you, and then and tell us what your experience was in regards to your health issue and your experience that you had.
Yes, sir. My name is.
Let me make sure you're. Is it podium mic? See if that does it, Kara.
My name is Kara. I'm 24 years old. About 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with papillary thyroid cancer. I was an RN major in the medical field. My life completely changed when I found out I had cancer so young, and they found the tumor inside my thyroid. They told me that I initially would have to have my surgery to have my thyroid removed. I got a total thyroidectomy done on May 17th of that year. About a month after my surgery of being on bed rest, I was admitted to Cartersville Medical Center, and I was told that I had a massive bilateral pulmonary embolism. It's a blood clot inside your lung. I was admitted into ICU. I spent a week at that hospital on a heparin drip. And while I was at that hospital, I was denied a claim through Blue Cross Blue Shield. And the reason for the denial of that claim was because apparently my condition was not life-threatening. And I was laying in a hospital bed, questioning life, questioning why this was happening to me. And really I was questioning if I was even going to make it or not. If I should tell my family that I love them and say my goodbyes, because the right side of my heart was failing. Luckily, I made it a week at that hospital. I went home, and the next day I had shortness of breath. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was again admitted into Kenistone, and my heart was even in worse condition, and my prognosis was over a 75% chance that I was not going to make it. And again, I was initially denied through Blue Cross and Blue Shield for that claim at that hospital for the same reasoning, telling me that my condition was not life-threatening. Although Blue Cross and Blue Shield did approve some of my claims, I had 250 claims within an entire year. I've been dealing with cancer. I've been dealing with the blood clot. I've been dealing with lupus, seeing hematologists, different specialists. Blue Cross and Blue Shield has made several claims. They've denied several claims. And I've just been drowning in debt and debating whether to file bankruptcy at 25 years old.
I find that hard to believe with pulmonary embolisms. First of all, my wife had pulmonary embolisms. That is a life and death issue. I assume that when you went back in the second time, what did they tell you? I mean, I know you didn't want to go back into the hospital.
Ironically, they thought I was over-exaggerating my condition, and I had a CT scan done. and about an hour waiting for my CT scan results, I had a doctor come in and tell me they needed to admit me right away, and I refused. I was really homesick. I didn't want to be admitted back into the hospital. And they had a doctor from the ICU department come down, and he told me the severity of my condition. He told me the right side of your heart is failing. Your ejection fraction is very reduced. If we send you home, he told me it's going to be on my conscience because I have a feeling you won't make it. You won't make it within 24 hours. You're going to be dead if we do not admit you right now. So I was rushed back upstairs, admitted, and they put me back on a heparin drip. I was monitored 24/7 by nurses, and my blood pressure dropped twice. And it was an emergency, and I had multiple ultrasounds. My heart was, it was really weak. And it's been 2 years post since that incident, and my body, my heart, my lung, I have permanent tissue damage in my lung right now, and my heart is still recovering.
Representative of Frustration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for sharing your experience today, and I'm so sorry for what you've been through. We've been provided an affidavit about the procedure for reviews of appeals, and I was wondering if you could speak to that. Any interaction that you've had with your insurer to appeal or say a mistake was obviously made here. You need to review my emergency room claims so that they would have an opportunity to fix the initial denials that they were made. Have you pursued that? And if so, what has been the outcome?
Initially, the claims were approved, but there's a lot of things that the insurance provider has not approved. I have a lot of claims that they've still denied. Some of them were related to my pathology. I had to receive radiation. My cancer did metastasize into my lymph nodes, and they did not cover the entire claim when I went to have radiation done. So that's something that is in collections. A lot of it, as far as legal obligations go, I was not familiar about the fine print. They didn't make it aware to me that I could appeal, or that I could get them to review the claim for the reason of denial. But like I said, initially it was approved. I'm not sure how it happened, but it did. But I still am drowning in debt with a lot of claims that should have been covered by the insurance provider.
Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Chairman, may I ask a follow-up? And I'm so sorry that you've had this experience. This study committee is looking into how the ER claim was reviewed. And do you recall if that was the claim that was initially approved, but then wasn't, that you were describing to me, or was that a different aspect of your treatment?
Both claims with the ER were initially denied in the beginning, and then they were approved. They were later approved, yes.
And did you have to go through the appeal process, or did they on their own do that?
They on their own must have done it, because like I said, I wasn't aware of the fine print. I wasn't honestly sure what appeal meant until today. I wasn't sure about the fine print.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today and being here.
Yeah, and
Thank
Kara,
you.
that's one of the things that we're trying to get at, is what we're seeing is these appeals, and certainly in the cases that we heard that are so obvious. This is not a sprained toe or a runny nose. Why are these appeal? And that's what this committee, I remind this committee that we're trying to get to, is why are obvious emergency situations being denied? Why would they even be denied to begin with? And again, this is part of what we think we're seeing as a pattern of, delay, then deny, and dismiss. And so again, committee, I want to say thank you to Kara. Kara took her time off today to come up here from Ackworth. She took a lift up here to come up and spend her time to tell her story of what has happened to her. And I'll remind everyone about the financial hardship that Kara has told us that she's going through with the debt and with the possibility of facing bankruptcy just to get out from up under this. As we look at the insurance policies, again, a little review of what we did last time, and I've done a little more investigating this. The average, and I don't know if the average insurance, for, again, a family of four, somewhere, I think nationally or whatever, it's around $19,000 a year. And individuals, it could be, $1,000, $1,500 a year. And the insurers are getting these premiums. And then the deductibles, I don't know, do you have a slide of deductibles? Yeah, that one. Yeah, I want to show y'all something. And Kara, thank you for your testimony. Any other questions from the committee for Kara? Kara, thank you for being with us. And as Leo pulls that up, I remind y'all, one of the issues that we see is people get scared of using their insurance or going to the hospital. It's already traumatic. But when you have a bad experience like Karen did, the second time and the third time you go back, you start to get reluctant. You start to question, should you go or not? So, again, awful. Guys, I found this figure there, and we're talking about cost. Since 2008, look at the deductibles that have increased. So this is a burden that's being put back on our insured after the premiums have been paid. So there's more and more that's coming out of our pockets for health care and for the premiums, then only to discover and to run into issues of denial of coverage or denial of claims. The second person I want to introduce today, Paul Sweatman. Paul, will you come up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Paul, I appreciate it. Would you, again, tell us a little bit about you and your experience?
Sure. My name is Paul Sweatman. Ironically, I'm actually a licensed insurance agent myself. So I get paid by a lot of these premiums that are collected by insurance agents. I don't specifically sell health insurance, even though I'm licensed to do so. A little bit about my story. 2017, around October, I had some severe swelling in my ankle. So I proceeded to go to an urgent care to figure out what was wrong with me. They told me I needed to immediately be admitted into a hospital, that I had some type of bacterial infection that they were unfamiliar with. Knowing very well how the insurance companies work, I did make sure that I went to an approved hospital. I went pretty well out of my way to go to Atlanta Medical Center, which is a WellStar facility. Upon being admitted, there was talk about possibly amputating my left leg if they cannot figure out what the bacterial infection is. I was admitted for 3 nights, pumped full of morphine and antibiotics until it was under control. I was released from the hospital and was out for about 5 days before I started seeing the symptoms come back and my ankle started to swell again. Being a person of my right mind, I figured I probably should return to the hospital to see what was going on. So I went to Wellstar in Marietta, and was seen there, sent home with more antibiotics, and about a week or 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail saying my claim was being denied, that I should not have, that it was a non-medical emergency, is why I went to the hospital, and that I should have gone to an urgent care rather than going to an emergency room, due to the type of symptoms that I was having. And as I want to mention, when a claim is denied, that does not go toward my deductibles. That's out of pocket. I have a lot of student debt. I have a master's degree that I'm continuing to pay for, as well as just cost to live, and I had to choose which bills I was going to pay. I began monthly installments on my medical bills, and then eventually let them lapse. And I've never had a late bill in my life, but since my bills have gone to collections, and I have collection agencies after me.
And Paul, did you try to appeal, or what was the?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I sure did. So I went through the normal route. Of course, I made phone calls and got online, and not a whole lot of luck there. I did eventually find on their website that all appeals must be done handwritten, mailed through the Postal Service. So which I proceeded to do. It was within you have 6 months to appeal with Blue Cross Blue Shield. I did it well within the 6 months. Every time I tried to follow up on my appeal, I was passed around to different departments. Some people couldn't find my appeal. Some people could find my appeal. I know I was hung up on at least 2 or 3 times. Eventually, you just get frustrated and you quit fighting.
And how much? Again, if you don't mind sharing, what was your denied claim? The amount?
It was approximately $1,600 to $1,700.
$23. Or Chuck, are your light on? Or you okay?
I don't have a question.
Again, that's what we're trying to get at the bottom of this, and so you as an insurance agent, a licensed insurance agent, went through the appeals process and still couldn't get an appeal. So you never heard back, or
Never.
ended up just getting buried.
It got buried. For all I know, they could have told me it was lost in the mail. What? It was sent through the Postal Service. In this day of technology, I had to send it through the Postal Service. I never got a letter saying that they received my appeal, that they're denying my appeal, that they're accepting my appeal. I couldn't get an answer.
Questions, committee, or even members? Paul, I appreciate your coming today to tell your story. I hope that, and I think we will, as people begin to understand this. I think, there are a lot more people like you out there, and I appreciate you coming today and sharing this with this committee, and hopefully what you've done and what Kara's done and the rest of our folks to come and testify today will help.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate
Bring
your
light
work.
to this situation and how much it's burdening our citizens. Thank you. Yeah. Our next testimony will come from Jim Hopkins. Jim contacted our office after our first hearing, after seeing the topic that was here. And I had an opportunity to go up and meet with Jim and hear his story. And it's probably one of the most heartbreaking stories that I've ever sat through. And as a father, I can't imagine what he went through, not only with the loss, and as he'll tell you, loss of a family member, his son, but probably the hell, and excuse my French, that he endured afterwards. But with that, Jim, would you tell us about yourself and about your situation?
Thank you, Senator. My name is Jim Hopkins. This is Joey's story with Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's a story of deny, delay, and dismiss. On 8:30 p.m. on approximately May 10th, I received a phone call that no parent ever wants to get. Joey, my son Joey, and friends, they were hiking on the Appalachian Trail up in North Carolina. There was a serious accident. No other details. Second phone call I got that night. My son was being life-flighted to the nearest trauma center. His friend Davis did not survive. I had to call Davis's parents and tell them he was deceased. He was dead. Third phone call I got that night. Greenville Memorial Hospital. My son had traumatic head injuries, and I need to get there as quick as possible. Let me tell you a little bit about my son. Joey was 22 years old. He was a Dean's List student at Georgia Tech. He was double majoring in mechanical engineering and physics. Summer of 2016, he had a paid internship at Fiat Chrysler up at a transmission plant for hybrid vehicles. When we got to Greenville late that night, it was the beginning of 48 hours of hell. Where you see my son had fell about 50 feet. Davis's friend fell about 150 feet. Joey was alive when he was rescued. However, he was very critically injured. First responders made the decision to call for an air ambulance. When I arrived late that night, my wife and I at Greenville, they very quickly told me my son was brain dead. However, they wanted to prove that medically. You know how you prove somebody's brain dead medically? You turn the respirator off and watch to see if he breathes. I watched my son. Joey was officially declared dead at 8:39, Wednesday, May the 11th. My son was an organ donor. His body was very badly damaged. It took a couple of days to get his body in shape to harvest his organs and also to line up the appropriate recipients. Approximately 9:30, Thursday, May 12th, my wife and I said our final goodbyes. Joey donated 6 of his organs to extend the lives of 4 others. Joey and Davis live on through the lives of these 4 others. Friday, May 13th. While I was out, my wife and I were out buying a grave plot and making funeral arrangements for my 22-year-old son. While we were attending Davis's funeral, and I was given a eulogy to the man who sacrificed his life to try to save my son, Big Blue, first denial letter, May 13th. As you said, the problem was my son was out of network. The problem was my son didn't meet the definition of traumatic head injury, according to Blue Cross Blue Shield. Folks, this was just the beginning of deny, delay, and dismiss. Here's just a few samples of my communications. And oh, by the way, I'm a CPA. I document things really well. May 19th, after getting over the shock of them denying, and first of all, folks, you got to realize my son's dead. I have just buried him. May 19th, I did what Paul did what any reasonable person would do. I picked up the phone and I called him and I appealed him. A couple days later, got another letter from Blue Cross. Coincidentally, it's dated May 19th also. We've approved your request. It's approved. Think it's over, right? June 8th. Blue Cross approved my appeal. You're asking about appeals? They approved it. At this time, I thought I was done. I thought everything was done. I was relieved. I wasn't going to have to pay these medical bills. Hell, they weren't even getting started yet. August 29th, Blue Cross Appeals Department. They did send it to me by email. But they told me the same thing they told Paul. They needed proof that I had the legal right to act for my deceased son. Joey was a college student. And you people have college students. You guys have wills? I had to go probate. I had to go down to Cobb County. I had to probate his will. I had no will. I had to do all this. Meanwhile, I had $150,000 worth of bills, folks, and they wanted to get paid. Nothing but a delaying tactic. About 2 weeks later, on September the 8th, I replied back to the appeals department with Blue Cross, and I sent them a copy of the death certificate, sent them a copy of the probate court paperwork. September 21st, 16. For 4 days, I couldn't access my Blue Cross Blue Shield online portal. Well, I may be dumb, but I'm not stupid. They cut me off. They cut off my access to them. November 7th, 16, I was successful in regaining my online access. I had to refile all my appeals by EOB. You know how many EOBs are in $150,000 worth of claims? This is my third or fourth time I had appealed this stuff. Now, I'm not going to keep going on over and over and over, but this just continued on and on and on. Numerous emails. Bills hadn't been paid. But I'll tell you about two more and then I'll shush. March 30th, got an email from Blue Cross. They told me they didn't have enough in the appeals department to make a decision. And after 10 months, they asked me for, who is the patient's name? What was the date of service? And oh, by the way, can you send me all your medical records? All 500 and some odd pages of them? The last one they sent me was April the 5th. And this was a real good one. I had sent them an email dated January 13th of 17, and they replied back 6 weeks later telling me there would be a delay in responding due to a high volume of emails received. Thank you, Big Blue. That told me a whole hell of a lot 6 weeks later. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. I did get my claims paid. Greenville Memorial Hospital, approximately $110,000, was paid November 16, 5 months after the date of services. And I don't like to call them date of services. My son's dead. 10 months after Joey's accident in March, they finally paid the little $500 bill to Transylvania County, North Carolina. For you see, my son was a major mountain rescue. They had to rappel down to get to where he was. They brought in a hook and ladder. They extended the ladder. They put him in a basket. They lowered him down. They finally get him down on the road. Then they put him in an ambulance. and it took Big Blue 10 months to pay a $500 bill. But folks, that one, the one they drug their heels on was the Med Transport, the air ambulance, $36,000 bill. Big Blue dug in their heels. They just absolutely refused to pay that bill. I appealed it umpteen dozen times. I appealed my appeal. I ran out of appeals. I filed a grievance. I lost the grievance. On April the 2nd, 2017, I sent an email threatening to initiate legal actions. The claim was paid April 25th, almost 1 year after the date of service. In conclusion, this is a summary of what it took me a year to accomplish to get Joey's medical bills paid. Big Blue denied this claim within 3 days, fought me every step of the way, had no compassion whatsoever for what me and my family were experiencing. But you know something? I wasn't going to give up. Oh, hell no. Joey was 22. He was under my ACA Obamacare. I'm paying $1,500 a month for Obamacare Silver coverages. Who is Big Blue to second guess the decisions of first responders? Who's Big Blue to play God? Why should the taxpayers of South Carolina or North Carolina get stuck with $150,000 in indigent care? Joey had insurance. Big Blue had a contractual obligation to pay him too. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. I'm not sure where to even begin. Yes, I'm sure there'll be questions. I know in talking to you, I'd asked a question. Had you gone through a complaint with the Department of the Insurance Commissioner's office? And I know you told me no.
No,
as a CPA and as someone who has kept every single copy, every single document and record of conversation back and forth. I know you handled this personally, and I can say after spending time with you, this was your mission to do this. But I think you're indicative of one thing. There are a lot of people out there who are experiencing in some way what you experienced. You had mentioned something about the indigent care with South Carolina and North Carolina. In other words, were they trying to pawn that off on?
It got so bad I refused to communicate with Blue Cross on the phone because I wanted written documentation of some of the things they were telling me. And yes, more than once it was intimated that your son is 21, you're not legally responsible for his bills. And I said, Big Blue, he's under my policy, you're obligated to pay, a contractual obligation to pay these bills. No.
So
It was intimated to me that why are you fighting this so hard? Your son is an adult. You're not legally responsible for your son.
So the inference that I'm hearing here is that you could walk away from this. You don't have to pay because you could walk away from this. And at that point, because the incident happened in North Carolina, South Carolina, that they would just let that go to indigent care at the state level.
If I wasn't going to pay it and Blue wasn't going to pay it, somebody's going to pay the bills.
Did you, when you got this, and as far as codes and things, I keep going back, and I think that's what this committee originally is trying to get at here. Basically, they had dated a letter 3 days after the date your son died.
My son's accident was on May 10th, and the initial denial letter, which I will show you a copy, it's in my hand, is dated May 13th.
So within 3 days of your son's death, they had supposedly reviewed this case and denied it.
That is correct.
I think that's one of the things that this committee is trying to get at is how. I remind this committee when I started the first meeting, I tried to look for, and actually under open records, asked for the policy that Anthem Blue Cross had filed with the insurance commissioner's office. And I will remind this committee and the folks that wasn't there, what I got back was an affidavit saying that it was confidential and proprietary information. But yet that's what I'm going to apologize. That's what I think this committee is trying to get at, is what is the policy? And then going back to the prudent layperson standard, you know, how can you do this? How does this line up? Committee, any questions? I mean, I'm not sure I'm not sure I know what to say in this case.
Awful quick denial, isn't
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're trying to figure out is under what basis.
Well, sir, what I'd like to point out to you was that I got a denial, then I got an approval, then I got another approval of my appeal, but yet they didn't pay any of the damn bills. You know, here's a letter dated June 8th, your appeal was approved.
Just kidding then. Yeah, and later on, just kidding, it's not appealed.
They didn't pay them. They didn't pay the hospital until like November. You heard the dates.
Yeah.
I have documentation on this.
And again, it gets to this whole issue. It's not only the responsibility we enter into a contract, which we think that we've been insured. The insured has paid premiums. Something happens. The healthcare providers provide health care, and in the end, there's a delay, dismiss, and denial. And we wonder how and what the strain is on our not only to this family, what has happened to you know your family, and the heartache that you've experienced with your loss, but then the financial burden that was put on you. You ended up winning because you're probably your background and your knowledge and your tenacity didn't let you lose. But probably for 99 out of 100 people, they would have given up. They wouldn't have had the education or the professional background that Mr. Hopkins did to stay in there and to keep persisting. They're giving up. Representative Mathiak.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to ask a couple of questions. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Hopkins. It's my understanding that if you have a child in college, that it's your responsibility to have them insured, and I believe that most universities won't allow your child to be, and I hate to say child, your young adult, to be enrolled in a college without being insured. So I give you kudos for having the blues, thinking that your son was insured. I see this day after day after day, and I'm a healthcare provider, and this is my life. I see this day after day. Mr. Chairman, do we have anybody here from Blue Cross that can give us information at that end? Have they been?
No. The response that I got after the first meeting or at the first meeting was that they would have to fly their medical director in from Missouri to discuss this. So again, this is this non-transparent industry. In this case, we're talking about Anthem because of the ER, but it's totally non-transparent. Nobody can see how they make the decisions, the policies that they implement. So no, and I think in our next hearing, I think I'll make sure that we send out a formal invitation to make sure that they have an opportunity to come in here and to address this issue. So good question.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
rest assured, Blue Cross isn't the only one.
That's what I suspect. Questions?
Yeah,
Any
I-
comment? Yeah.
Thank you for your testimony. Let me ask you, was the hospital or any of the physicians also filing these claims along with you or helping you with your claims?
No, they fought me.
I'm sorry,
No, they made my life difficult.
the hospital?
Yes.
Okay, so it was hospital and the insurance companies.
No, I wouldn't put it on the hospital, but they made everything made difficult. My son was 22,
Right.
and until I had probated his court papers, nobody would cooperate with anything.
Okay, because as a provider, sometimes I have a little problem with insurance companies, and sometimes that problem gets miscommunicated to the patients. And it's been my experience that sometimes we're blamed for not sending the things that we do send, and even have had to send copies of radiographs registered mail because the patient 3 times were told we never sent radiographs, and it's in the chart. And so I just wonder if you were having any issue with that also.
I had some issues with the invoice totals from Greenville,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually called the CFO. Never got him on the phone, but I got his secretary on the phone, and she got it straightened out.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that your family went through this. Your family should never have to go through anything like this on an accident, much less losing a son. It's immediate denial after three days is just unbelievable.
Sir, they did it repetitively for a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Let's
heard
not
that.
say 3 days. Let's
Yeah.
call it what it is. I have files this thick where they repetitively denied me.
No,
But-
I understand that. To make a decision within 3 days sounds like almost denial all claims, and then we'll figure it out
On
later.
automatic denials, I think
Yeah.
is what the representative is trying to get at,
Sure.
and that's what this committee is trying to get to the underlying policy of why this is happening. In other words, we can't. And in this case, I think it's illustrative of there was a denial, and it was 3 days after the date your son died. There's no way, and again, I say no way. I very seriously doubt that a qualified medical person within Anthem, Blue Cross, and Blue Shield had time to go through the records and look at that and make a determination. My gut is it's all computer-based generated, and no one knows, why. And that itself, sir, is at the heart of what we're trying to get at.
Well, I'm not trying to sit here and take up y'all's time, but it's obvious the computer's doing this, because what human would turn down a case of an emergency rescue and deny it in total?
Yeah. Well, it's the obvious, and it's just like Kara, the young lady, Kara back there. She went and she was automatically denied, just in this case, and that's what we're trying to get at. It's almost unconscionable. But again, I think it goes to a pattern that we're seeing, and the pattern is delay, dismiss, and deny. And eventually some people will give up. Some people don't have the aptitude or the background or the fortitude that you had to stick in there. Quite frankly, if you're almost not a lawyer, I don't understand how you even understand all of it. But it's frustration, it's time. But again, if the claim is denied, then they win. They've kept your premiums. The insured has lost because now you're strapped with a bill. And quite frankly, the providers are lost because they also supposedly are inside of a network, and it's sort of the three-legged stool model. Okay? And a three-legged stool will stand, and it will stand firm. But if one leg does not carry its own weight, then the whole thing falls. And that's what's happening. Not only what they did to you personally and the hell they put you through, but what they were about to do to put the financial burden back on you But I also think about those hospitals and the rescue, the providers. They weren't getting paid either. And that's just part of the bigger picture of what's happening in healthcare today. And we're sitting here struggling. We're starting to see the effect, and people like you, Kara, and Paul, and others are coming forward to tell your story, to share a personal experience. And it's starting to illustrate how it affects our families, it affects our communities financially, how it's starting to erode our healthcare system. And quite frankly, the priority is no longer, in my mind, about providing quality health care between the patient and the healthcare provider. It seems to be, it's more about a financial reward or the financials of one of the parties. So, Mr. Hopkins, I want to say thank you. Since I've met you and spoke with you, and again, for what you did today to come and talk to this committee and to share your personal story. A personal story I can tell everybody in this audience that he still, to this day, is living. And I think it's probably one of the best examples of how it's affecting us, okay, as individuals across the state. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
One more, and the last one for the day. Oh, I say I may have two. I know that the Hospital Association and has got some testimony that I think they want to bring. Who's going to do it? Ethan, Donna, or where you want to get up and?
I think Deb Daly from Northeast.
Okay. All right. If you will, introduce yourself and tell us who you're with and.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much. I'm Deb Bailey, and I represent the Northeast Georgia Health System, and I would like to say first how sorry I am for Kara, Paul, and Mr. Hopkins. It's very difficult to listen to, but I represent the Northeast Georgia Health System. We are a 3-hospital system. And one of those 3 hospitals is the second busiest emergency department in the state of Georgia, with over 110,000 visits a year. In a prior career as a master's prepared nurse, I was over that emergency department, so I know what it looks like for these type of people to come in to our emergency room, be cared for by very qualified folks, and at the end of the day, it be determined that it wasn't necessary to provide the care that we provided them retrospectively, of course. But now we have, as you listened to the testimony before, we are the providers of that care. It is not the Blue Cross or the insurers that provide that care. It is the hospitals, our physicians, and our qualified staff that provide the needed care. We have a managed care department now, and we have hundreds of people that work in our managed care department. They manage over 145 contracts for our 3-hospital system with insurance providers.
Repeat those.
145 different contracts on an annual basis.
And how many people are do you have to hire just to keep up
We
with
have
this?
hundreds of staff to just manage that. And now we have a whole other entire staff to deal with Kara and Paul and Mr. Hopkins and others, family that come to have the same issues that you've just heard. Care was provided to the patient, and after the care was provided, then they are denied coverage. And of course, You know, this is not talking about indigent care. It's not talking about charity care. It's not talking about the uninsured. We're talking today about people that come to our emergency department that believe that they are insured and they are paying premiums. You know, we have over $100 million of indigent and charity care. But now we have only a small portion of patients that are insured, and now those patients, their what they believe is their coverage, they are no longer, you know, we the provider are not getting paid for that coverage. So I can speak today very specifically, and I was asked to be prepared to discuss with you as a committee about very specific examples of the type of patients that we cared for and were denied coverage. But of course, remember, we are in the middle of this. We have provided coverage for these patients. We provide an emergency department with trauma surgeons, trauma nurses. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have very expensive overhead, but yet we do need to be paid for the care that's provided. And remember, as an emergency department, we provide care for everyone that comes through our door, regardless of their ability to pay. But I can give you very specific examples if you like, and if time allows.
Yes, please.
I certainly cannot give you an example like Mr. Hopkins has. I'm grateful that I cannot give you that example, but I can tell you about patients that have come to our emergency department. I'll start with a 64-year-old male that came to our emergency department in an ambulance following a motor vehicle accident. It was a rollover collision. The EMS reported heavy damage to the top and front end of the vehicle. The patient presented to the ED with bruises all over his body and extremities. He was suffering from a head contusion and concussion. And despite the fact that the patient experienced serious car accident and was transported to the ED via and had severe injuries, Blue Cross denied that was medically necessary. We had a second person, because this is a different issue, a 62-year-old female who presented to the medical center ED with sharp lower abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and blood in her urine. The patient rated her pain on a scale of 1 to 10 to be 10. She had sought medical attention the day before at an urgent care because she called her insurance company and they told her that her symptoms were not emergent, go to a quick care or an urgent care. She did that. At the urgent care, they did treat her the next day. She was not any better. She came to the emergency room, and of course she had 2 kidney stones requiring surgery, and that was denied. Those are examples. We have examples of patients that have come in unconscious. We have patients that come in with chest pain, a patient that had a stroke, poisoning, serious breathing problems, severe burns, severe cuts, uncontrolled bleeding, seizures, and then maybe the last patient that I will mention to you had a gunshot wound to the hand. The patient's family member was attempting suicide, and the patient reached up and the patient was shot through the hand. Blue Cross denied that and called that a puncture wound post-discharge. She had a gunshot wound through her hand, and that was denied as an ED emergency room visit and was considered by Blue Cross Blue Shield as a puncture wound. These are the examples that we deal with on a daily basis. And it certainly does put us, because at that time, because the patient is insured, we do attempt to try to get payment, because we know we're not going to get payment from indigent and charity. We've doubled our charity policy so that we can help some of these people with their bills. But we do, out of an effort to stay solvent and to provide the community benefits that we provide, because we are a community not-for-profit hospital, then we do attempt to try to get payment. I hope that patients do not feel that we are the bad guy when we try to receive payment. And then sometimes we'll even have patients call us and ask us, can you please just change the medical record so that I can, and we're saying, of course, we could never change your medical record, but you did have an emergency. And we encourage them to keep doing what they're doing. And if it's necessary, then we help them with some of their appeals process, because we know, unlike the example that Mr. Hopkins just gave you, if Mr. Hopkins had not been so persistent as he continued to be, then that bill, and he would have said, well, yeah, my son's 22, I'm not responsible, so I can't deal with it, which I think many of us would feel like, I can't deal with this on top of having dealt with my son's death. That had that been the case, then that bill would not have been paid, and that would have been bad debt to the hospital, further debt to the hospital. So
Or you would have had to pursue it, a hospital to the patient.
we would have, and we do persist in that, and most often we write off a tremendous amount of it, and then we set up some type of payments for those patients. But that is certainly unfair to the people that you've heard today that are insured, and to our family and our friends.
Dave, I got a question real quick.
Yes, sir.
Representative Administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your testimony, ma'am. We were given, this was at the previous meeting and then again today, an affidavit of John T. Moore, MD. Are you familiar with the affidavit describing the procedure for consideration given by Blue Cross?
No, sir, I'm
Okay.
not.
Well, my reading of it is there's 3 stages to the review before a denial is actually made. And so that's what I'm trying to get to with the specific examples that you provided, if you know. And I think also the rollover car wreck that you described and the gunshot wound, going through some of this, but it says that there's a diagnosis code that's listed first. Do you know if an incorrect diagnosis code was made in any of those cases, or if they were properly coded?
They were properly coded.
Okay.
And I use those examples because those are very specific examples that we have in our lawsuit with
Yes,
Blue
ma'am.
Cross Blue Shield,
Okay. All right.
and trying
Well,
to get
I didn't
payment.
know about that. They're just examples that were offered here. And then I see the second step is there's certain classifications. If certain things were done, then it looks like the claim is processed. And one of them is an ambulance claim was billed for the member on the same date of service. So that obviously occurred in the examples you provided. Okay. And then there's a review that's made if it hasn't been captured in any of the first 2 steps. So it sounds like, to your knowledge, this procedure is not being followed with respect to the 2 claims that you mentioned, the rollover car wreck and the gunshot wound. Is that right?
I would agree.
And those claims were never approved, right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. No further questions.
Representative Hawkins.
Thank you for coming. Got a question for you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I know that you see a lot of these claims, and you and I sat, 2 weeks ago in the hospital with some of your staff in different departments with some insurance people there going over all this. I see part of a problem with this is the prudent layperson standard that they keep referring to, which tells the patient in their contracts, if you think you've got an emergency, go. But then they end up denying that, and Do you ever hear cases of the insurance company blaming the hospital, the emergency room, by saying that was not an emergency and you shouldn't have treated them? Is that part of this problem too?
Yes, sir. And I think the reason that I could not answer your question specifically is we have very skilled, specific, qualified people that do nothing but code. That's their job. They do nothing but code. And so then we have another set of people, because these situations demand it now, that do nothing but deal with the patients when the patients start to call to say, my insurance company said you coded this wrong. So if you'd coded it differently, we would have paid it. Or my insurance company said that, I'm not and so always putting us as the bad guy. And that's why they often call and say, my insurance company said you coded it wrong. Can you please code it differently so my insurance company will pay it? And we go on, no, this was a true emergency. It was coded correctly, and your insurer owes this.
So help me understand this then. Federal law requires you to accept emergency patients under the AMALA Act, correct?
Correct.
And then you have to do a triage, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then they're admitted to the back of the emergency room where the physicians are, correct? So all this is happening, and it's not under your control. I mean, you've got to treat each patient, correct?
Yes, sir.
So then you're at the mercy of an insurance company that tells a patient, well, you didn't have a true emergency, although you think you did, and the contract says if you think you do, you can go. But you didn't have one, so we're not going to pay them, and you aren't responsible for paying them either. That happens, doesn't it?
Yes, sir. I think that's
Thank you.
exactly what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, I know we're late in the day,
no,
but
that's
I
quite all right.
appreciate it being here. Two points. I want to go back to some of the examples that you gave, and I thought I heard you say one was unconsciousness,
Yes, sir.
one was a stroke,
Yes, sir.
and certainly you said a gunshot wound.
I did.
I'm looking at one of the only things I found off the internet, which is deciding where to go, which is an illustrative on their website. And the first bullet point in the emergency room says sudden or unexplained loss of consciousness. The third one down says signs of stroke. So in other words, if somebody came in with a stroke or signs of stroke, right?
Yes,
And
sir.
I think you mentioned it.
I did, and there is nothing more important with signs of a stroke than to get to the emergency
And I
room
understand
in
you
a
have
timely
a
basis.
short window to go through the stroke
Yes, sir.
protocol or damage, or permanent damage.
That is correct.
Okay. I unfortunately, I don't think I see on this gunshot wound. They've got stab wounds. They probably need to add gunshot wound to
Well,
the
not if
emergency
they're
room.
not going to cover it.
Well, I guess, yeah, point taken. But I want to make a point here, and I don't know if you certainly don't know specifics, and I don't want to get into details, but if we could talk in approximate numbers. And again, we go back to there's a big issue that's going on not only in this country but the state, and it's health care. And until we really get in and look at what is wrong with the healthcare system, we can't fix it. And throwing more money at this issue doesn't seem, in my opinion, to be the solution. Because, again, if you look at the financials, you look at the income of these publicly traded insurance companies, their income is going up and up and up, and they're at record highs, which tells me that money is not the issue. We specifically in this state are seeing, and again, we're dealing with not only the rural issue, rural hospitals closing, but I'm constantly seeing where access to healthcare is shrinking. And going back to your issue with talking about an emergency room and hospitals, how much in ballpark figures, approximate figures, are we talking about money-wise that you are being saddled with, the provider are being saddled with? And again, ballpark. I don't want specifics. I mean, is it $1,000? Is it $1 million? Is it in tens of millions of dollars? Because I think that's very important as we go forward to try to look at what's going on around the state, and why we're getting closures.
We know in our 3 hospital system that on an annual basis, between the indigent, charity, and the bad debt that some of this goes into, that it's $150 million to our 3 hospitals.
Indigent is one thing, but
Yes,
I think
sir.
in narrowing my question down, and you may not be prepared to give the answer, but I think from a point of view of we believe there's a contract, people believe that they're insured, you believe as a provider you're entitled to, the contract and the insured holding up its part of the bargain, and then you get to the end, you've delivered the health care to the patient, and there's no payment. How much do you think that is? And you may not be prepared to answer that.
I think because of the seriousness of the nature of these questions, that I would like to, on the next meeting, come back to you with very specific and accurate answers to that question. I think I can answer the question from the standpoint of how much that we billed that we did not get paid, that was insured. The patient came in, was insured, but we didn't get paid. But that would not address the cost to our organization of dealing with the complexities of trying to get paid and all of the staff that's involved in the processes of that, in the contracts of that, and the dealing with the patient complaints of that. I mean, that doesn't capture that.
The total cost.
Yes, sir.
of
But
dealing with
but
it.
I can come back to you, I believe, with a pretty good ballpark answer to say to you that we billed this much to insured payers, we were paid this much, we were denied this much.
I would, and I appreciate your candor with because that's what we want. We want accurate, factual answers. And again, the reason I'm going down this road is that if you're a provider, whether it's a physician, whether it's the hospital, okay, we're sitting here across the state and we're seeing a shrinkage of providers.
Yes, sir.
Various reasons. I think some of them are, quite frankly, aging demographic and retirement of healthcare providers. That may be one of it, but I think you're also seeing, because of the complexity of dealing with the insurance companies, and quite frankly the losses, if you will, of what you believe that you are entitled, the money that you're entitled to because you've provided services that you thought were honestly covered under a contract. They're either being flat out denied, or they're being denied because they're putting obstacles in the way of the providers to try to keep those from being paid. And I will remind you, we have had institutions around the state close in some of our rural areas where an ER, a hospital, was probably the only access that they had. And some of them may not be as big or as large as your hospital system. But I guarantee you, those folks in the rural areas, that hospital and that ER was very important. And it may not be $150 million, but I guarantee you, if there were $3 or $4 or $5 million that they were getting denied for services, that could be the difference in keeping the doors open, and having a place of access for health care in those areas. And I think this is something we need to go at. Again, it's non-transparent. I can't, what bugs me, and again, I can't see, we in this General Assembly cannot see contracts. We can't see anything. It's all protected up under this proprietary, affidavit that this is confidential and proprietary.
But understand, Mr. Chairman, we do have contracts, but these contracts with these insurers are being changed unilaterally on their part. And we're talking today about ED, emergency room denials. We're not talking about the diagnostic imaging denials that fall with the same type of stories as this, maybe not as critical, but they often end up being as critical, and the OB, because we have now unilateral changes in policy for those areas also.
And I know that's something that we have is an issue that's been addressed. So what I'm hearing, and I think this goes back to, these health care plans are they're annual plans. People
Some of them are multi-year plans.
Multi-year plans, but usually people sign up with a plan, they think that's it. We can count on it. There's continuity in the plan. And so what I know I've seen with physicians, and I assume this is the same way with hospitals, is like you said, there is unilateral changes midstream. So there's just a new set of rules that are basically put on you, and here's what we're doing.
Yes, sir.
Again, my analogy of the little boy who owns the football, and all the kids in the neighborhood come to play football, but the little kid with the football gets to make up the rules as he goes, or he takes his football home. That's the analogy of what I think this is. And guys, I want to say thank you to the folks who have showed up today to testify. I don't know if there's any. We do have some more questions. I don't know who was first, but Hatchett, Representative Hatchett.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got
Uh-oh.
a couple of statements and a couple of questions, and a couple of the questions have been answered. But I will just make the statement to start with is that as a producer of multiple kidney stones and multiple trips to an ER, it better be covered by insurance. And it is an emergency. But you talked about how you have multiple people coding. Do y'all also, and I guess I should know this, but do you also have many people that are interacting or negotiating with the insurance companies to handle, this is what we did? I mean, do we change
have
things?
an entire division
Okay.
that does that.
And
We
then,
have a managed care division.
so a lot of that takes place before we as a patient even know that's taking place. So do you, if you realize that the way it was coded or the interaction with the insurance company is not the way the patient felt like it was going to go, do you then reach out to the patient, or does insurance is there an interaction that includes the actual patient at some point other than just getting a bill on email or
The interaction usually with the patient post-discharge, the care's been provided, the patient went home, the patient has insurance. They thought that it was an emergency and it was covered, and maybe they had a $50, couple $100 deductible with their emergency room visit. And then when they get that denial is when they call and interact with our staff.
Okay.
They want to try to understand
do
that.
do you ever get on the phone with the patient, the insurance company, and y'all? Is there ever those conversations?
No, sir, I don't think that happens.
Well, my last statement is the 800-pound gorilla is not in the room. And, we've to make any progress, we've got to somehow, they've got to be at the table. If you're not on the menu, if you're not at the table, or if you're not invited to dinner, you're on the menu.
Yeah.
But I guess there's lack of trust between hospitals and insurance companies and any provider, and somehow we've got to get that trust back so that we as patients and the rest of the citizens of Georgia aren't the ones suffering. So, and
Well,
that's a huge task, but
I think anytime that you engage over a period of time and negotiate and have a signed contract, there is an expectation on both sides that that contractual agreement is adhered to.
Thank you. All right, Representative Frustration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry for second question here. This is maybe a request for next time, which we haven't really discussed today, but it weighs heavy on my mind. Circumstances where a patient does not seek emergency treatment because they're concerned that it will not be on the approved list, or that the condition or the symptoms that they have are not to that level, or they don't know. And ultimately, they do seek treatment, and they're asked, why did you wait so long? Why are you just getting to us now? This could have been addressed earlier. That's something that really concerns me. And so if in your hospitals you've come across circumstances where that said, admission says, why did you wait so long? And they say, well, I was concerned it wasn't on the approved list, and as a result, the conditions may be worse than it would have been earlier. I'm very curious about that. And so if you have any information on that for future committee meetings, or you can submit it in writing to my office, I'd appreciate it.
We do have examples of that.
All right, thank you.
Representative Hawkins.
I'm going to turn another facet to this. Now, this is going to be really hard for me to do, but it's the truth, so I think we look at a problem from every side. And so these questions go to that. We do have instances where people are using the emergency room rather than going to their primary care physician, don't we?
Yes, sir, we do.
And when that occurs, you still have to see them. You still have to do the triage, and the physician still needs to see them, right?
That is correct.
And so the emergency room charges, of course, are layered. So at the end of the day, much more than going to their physician, GP, correct?
Yes, sir.
How much of that, and so in the defense, believe it or not, of the insurance companies, usually don't go in this route, I can see some of the problems they have because they're not in control of that. But in your case, you're not in control of who you say yes and no to. Because when the federal government set up MALA, it says you will see them, but we're not going to pay you. So that's where a big disconnect is. And so getting down to my question, out of the emergency room patients that you see, what percent would you, just ballpark, I know you don't know the exact, what percent would you say are patients that really could be seen by the GP rather than going to the emergency room?
I think at one time we looked at that, and it was probably about 23%, if I remember correctly.
Right.
But now, of course, those are earache things and those type of
Toothaches
things.
and stuff, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Of course, now the problem also is when you're in extreme pain, that's an emergency to anybody. Right.
For most people, it is when it's them.
Yeah, yeah. And what I had witnessed, not much, but I hear it's going on more, is that you got patients coming in ambulances, called an ambulance so they wouldn't have to wait for 2 hours. They figured that part out too, haven't they?
Well, we've got some fast tracks.
Yeah, yeah.
If you have chest pain, you get in real quick.
Yeah, yeah.
But I represent, and you make a good point. Well, you know, this legislature and this General Assembly is I think one of the most balanced General Assemblies. We are seeking to solve problems.
Right.
But with your question and again your defense a little bit, not much, of the insurance companies, and your question regarding that 20%. How many of those were uninsured versus people who had insurance? And I think that's the major difference, because we're talking about people who come in and who are insured. We all hear the horror stories of the uninsured coming in and using the emergency room as you know, primary access or primary care, you know, access to primary care, which we all disagree with. But in all fairness, I mean, I think there needs to be a distinction between people who are insured and are paying these premiums that are outrageous. I mean, that are going up exponentially every year. Deductibles going up, co-pays, co-insurance going up. How many of those are the ones that are coming in with a cold or a stub toe or earache that truly?
That's about 80%, because what we see and what we have in our community, which is probably similar to many communities is we have 11 urgent cares or quick cares. But when because they are not emergency rooms, when you go to them, you are expected to pay at that point of entrance. And so many people, instead of having to pay, then will go to the emergency room where we are required by law to treat you regardless.
But these, you're talking in these cases, the uninsured.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. They often do not seek care, you know.
Representative Hatchett, another
I
question?
do have one other question, and this may apply more toward the industry and to Mr. James, but in light of kind of in follow-up of what you had said, Representative Hawkins, on as far as the insurance and asking, you know, a little bit of where they might be coming from, how many hospitals with ERs out there are still advertising their wait time to go in the ER? You're attracting people that might not be needing to go there. So it's just kind of, to me, a catch-22. Just a thought. I mean, I don't know.
No, sir.
No.
Some of them do.
Or are those urgent care? And again, we're here to solve a problem. But again, I want to put the focus back on insured people who are paying premiums, who are getting denied gunshot wounds, strokes, unconsciousness, wrecks. I mean, you know, falling off of mountains. Okay. And I think this is larger than we think, and we'll dive into this more. But there are thousands. And there was a report, Senator McCaskill, U.S. Senator, did a report, and there's some staggering number of denials. So with that, I appreciate it. And also, I want to make sure, I'd love to get the cost, and Ethan, you may do this on a hospital-wide basis, or statewide basis. What is the cost that we have? Okay? And what you had just said, as far as, you know, you're literally hundreds of people who do nothing but try to deal with the insurance companies and the correct coding and billing. What is the actual cost that is going into an administrative type function versus healthcare, doctors, nurses, diagnosis, all of that? So, guys, with that, I want to say thank y'all. I know this is late. I apologize for the scheduling today, but this is a very important topic, and I think it's, quite frankly, I know this is ER, but I think that this is indicative of a lot of other, I'm going to say this, unscrupulous type policies that we can't see, that are behind the curtain, if you will, that we keep hearing anecdotally over and over and over again, but no one can answer the question. And I think that's the bigger question too, is what other unscrupulous type policies, not only Anthem, but all of the insurance companies, okay, what are they hiding? I think that's a big question.
Thank you very
y'all.
much.
Thank
you
y'all,
for your
and
attention to it.
we'll be adjourned, and we'll post our next meeting, and we'll look forward to having y'all back.